A couple of weeks ago, I released my latest short documentary, which was about a chef called Gareth Ward, who is the only Two-Michelin-Star chef ever in Wales. It was also the first time he's allowed someone to do a documentary on him and about his journey to get to where he is now through a lot of sacrifice and obsession. Today, I just wanted to go through a couple of questions that you guys sent in about the film. And if you haven't seen the full film, I'll put a link here and below so you can go have a watch and hopefully you enjoy it. So first question is, how did you get access originally and did you have to pitch to them? So this all came about because my mum, who is also a chef, she went to Gareth's restaurant called Shear a few years ago and came back and said it was the best meal she's ever had in her life. I looked him up and was immediately struck by the drama of the place and the drama of his food, but also the juxtaposition between kind of the persona he gave off, which was this, very big, masculine, rugged appearance, but this very beautiful and crafted food that he was doing. And the restaurant itself obviously, looked incredible. And I was also struck that there was nothing online about his kind of personal journey to get to where he was. And I always think anyone who's ever kind of got to a success of that sort of level of two Michelin stars, there's got to be an interesting story there, particularly if it's not been told before. So that immediately drew me to him and to this project. In terms of gaining access, so it took a year for this project to actually happen from the first time I reached out to his team. It was honestly just a lot of me harassing them for a year, trying to get a meeting with him, trying to convince them to let me do it. And they were extremely patient with me. And eventually they did say yes, which I was extremely grateful for because they absolutely didn't have to. And like I said, that he'd never let someone do this kind of thing before. So yeah, there was no pitch. I just sent them my work and said I'd really love to do something around Gareth's personal story to get to where he is today. And that was it. And eventually I got a meeting with Gareth, went and met him. We chatted for a good few hours after service. He fed me. I had the food, which was honestly, I told him this afterwards, I don't really have the vocabulary to do it justice because I'm not a chef, so I can't really explain how amazing it was, but it was absolutely astonishing and made me want to do it even more. And after that, he said, yeah, let's do it. It was something I wanted to do to really showcase the sacrifice he's made to get to where he is and the extraordinary skill and work and dedication and commitment that went into that sort of a journey. So the next question is, what scenes did you end up staging and how hard was it filming in a working restaurant? So there was only one staged scene out of the whole thing, bar the interview, and the stage scene was him kind of making notes in his notebooks. And it was only staged in the sense of it's not something he particularly normally do, but in terms of what he was doing, he genuinely hadn't looked at those notebooks for years, so he really was reminiscing about that, and he really was writing thoughts and feelings that came up as he read through those pages. So it was sort of half staged. And the other thing that was staged was obviously the food shots, which I'm sure we'll get to, but the rest of it, nothing. The whole thing was shot over 3 days whilst they were just getting on with their day-to-day work and jobs. So yeah, that was challenging. There were definitely things that came up from that. Shooting during a working service where we really needed to be kind of as hidden and out of the way as possible. And you can't stop-start things. Again, there's paying customers there, so we can't interrupt service, we can't interrupt food. We needed to be out the way and as invisible as we could have been. And that involved a lot of kind of logistics on our side of cameras and where we positioned ourselves and kind of, running in, getting a few shots, running back out. So yeah, that was difficult too. But we obviously wanted to have a certain style to the whole piece, and therefore not having the time to kind of set shots up made that quite tricky. You couldn't redo takes. You just had to hope that if you were started a camera move that the action was going to play out how you wanted. But I think the other challenge was because a lot of it took place in the same spot, kind of the pass. I knew we needed to do something to make it look different during the different scenes and during the the length of the film. So we had to get quite creative with our lighting to change how that pass looked visually. And Brendan, our cinematographer, did an unbelievable job at really giving different scenes in that same location a really different look visually. And that was difficult, making sure the lighting wasn't getting in the way. We couldn't stop them during their job, so we needed to just get it done. The next question is, how many cameras were you running and how large were the crew? So there were three of us. That was it. Me, Brendan, the cinematographer, and our AC and camera operator, Callum. I prefer working with as tiny a crew as I possibly can do. I think it makes sets run quicker and smoother in documentary settings to have the minimum amount of people possible, particularly in a live working kitchen environment. Camera-wise, we had three cameras. We had two DJI Ronin 4Ds, and we had an Alexa Mini doing the kind of gritty ghost effect shots. So during a lot of the scenes, we were running all three almost simultaneously. We'd have kind of a longer lens on one of the 4Ds and a wider lens on the other 4Ds, and then a zoom lens on the Alexa Mini. And we'd just sort of take it in turns, running in and out with the cameras, doing different passes and getting different kinds of shots. And that was particularly important for the kind of live service element, where we'd like tag team almost with the three different cameras, running in, getting a few shots, running back out again. Someone might be kind of at the back of the restaurant getting some shots of the guests eating food, while someone might be at the front kind of on focusing on the pass. At one point I went round into the kitchen area where they were doing the cooking and kind of floated there a bit, whilst Brendan was on the monitor kind of operating the focus or the gimbal head, just to make my life a bit easier because I was being like smoked out by the by the fire. So yeah, it was important that all three of us were there, and having that kind of tag team element with cameras made life a lot easier during the shoot and working kind of around these live elements that we couldn't control. So next question is, how did you do those streaky ghost effects? So those were done with a ghost filter from Prism Effects, I think they're called, which is like a handheld piece of glass that you hold in front of the lens and you kind of wave about, and it creates this kind of like ghosting effect. And I knew that it was going to be used in these kind of like transition moments, almost mimicking like slow shutter speed at times, or the kind of effect you get when analog film kind of runs too slow through the camera. So for several hours, Callum was just off with the Alexa, basically getting a load of those shots, just shooting loads of details and textures and things like that with the ghost filter, kind of waving it in front, finding those nice moments where it felt really kind of warped and ghosty. What was the lighting set up for the chef's table style food shots? So this was one of the most complicated elements of the shoot. And the reason it was so complicated was because originally we had quite a large room to do this in. And then because of some guests turning up who needed that room to stay in, we had to be moved to a very, very small room. So we were in a very tight space. The way that we did it was we had two kind of set up areas with two different backdrops. So one was this kind of wood backdrop and one was this kind of leather curtain backdrop, and we had fixed lighting for both setups with several lights on each kind of setup. And then we just played around with how we could turn some of those lights off and on to create different lighting styles, but always keeping them in their fixed position. And then again, we used kind of both of the 4Ds. One was on a flex up above that we could kind of swing straight across both setups so that we didn't have to keep moving it about, and the other one was just handheld in chicken head mode to get some really nice glossy smooth movements. The thing that made this super complicated was that we did all that during a live service. So as the meal was happening, they'd send up an extra dish to us upstairs at every course and we'd shoot it, and then the next one would come and we'd shoot it. So we had to do that for the 30 courses that there were with, we couldn't stop, like the dishes just kept coming. So we really had to be on our toes and prepared. But that's why that kind of two setup worked well. And that's why we wanted to keep all these lights in fixed positions so that we could really move with pace, but create a lot of different styles and looks within those two different setups. And I'm really happy with how those came out because, again, in something like Chef's Table, they have a studio, they have a whole, period of time dedicated to doing those beauty shots, not during a live service. So I think what we ended up achieving with the kind of restrictions that we were working with is absolutely a testament to Brendan, the cinematographer, for coming up with those two setups and making it look as good as it did. Was the music composed? And if so, what was the process like working with a composer on a documentary? So yes, this was all composed music by the wonderful Hugo at Brother Music, who just did an unbelievable job with the fact that the brief I gave him was something along the lines of, it needs to feel Welsh and Viking, but also with a little bit of like Oriental Japaneseness about it. And then also throw in some like heavy trance drum and bass style too. So I don't know how he took that and came up with what he did, but he did, and it's unbelievable. That brief was trying to reflect kind of what I felt going into the restaurant and what I felt kind of being there and with Gareth and his kind of personality and the tone he's created in the food and in the place. So yeah, somehow Hugo worked his magic and came up with that. The process itself, so everyone does it differently. There's no set process, it's just the way that I do it. I edit to music a lot of the time. It really kind of drives my editing style. I find it very difficult not to have music there. So what we did was we started with that brief, and I asked Hugo to just do a load of like experimentation, like make a load of different tracks, different styles for different kind of points in the film. I gave him a really rough version of just the interview edit so that he could see the different kind of scenes and narrative beats that were going to happen throughout the film. And he went away and created all these different kind of samples and textures and like musical sequences, which were fantastic. So I edited with those. He gave me the stems for them, like them broken down into individual kind of tracks and layers. And I used those along with some other kind of similar temp music I found to edit with. And then once we were happy with the edit and we locked the edit, I then sent that back to him, where he kind of recomposed everything now that the edit was finished. And that meant in some places, you know, keeping something similar to what his temp music was, but in others, he kind of reimagined it and replaced all the other kind of temp music that I found for something that he wanted to put in there. And that brought a load of other creative ideas into the process. And I 100% think the film wouldn't be what it is without the music that he did, because it is so pivotal for capturing such a unique blend of tones and essences that Gareth and the restaurant has. Right, last question is, if another filmmaker wanted to shoot in a Michelin level kitchen, what's the one thing you'd warn them about that you wish someone had warned you? That's a really good question. So I think it's the fact that every restaurant and chef is very, very different. And that means probably not going in with any kind of preconceived expectations about how you think the service or the food element will run, because everyone does it differently. And I think that meant that I had some ideas about how I wanted to shoot certain things that when I started to see really behind the curtain of how they operated as a kitchen and during service, just didn't come out how I expected them to, because it wasn't how I expected them to be. So for example, they hardly spoke to each other during service, which I was really surprised by, because normally when you think of kitchens, particularly, you know, high functioning kitchens, you think there's a lot of communication going on. There's got to be a lot of people talking to each other, you know, getting timings right and things like that. But as Gareth told me, you know, they're so in sync and so practiced at what they do, they shouldn't need to do that anymore in that way. That's how he wants his kitchen to operate. It's militant and it's, yeah, completely kind of telepathic in that sense, and so practiced and versed at doing these things that they just know how to do them. So that was completely unlike what I thought it would be. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is if you're gonna go shoot in a kitchen, particularly a, you know, high level kitchen, to make sure you recce, make sure you talk to the chef and other chefs and get a really good idea about how that kitchen operates, both so that you can honor that in the work itself, but also so that you understand how you need to shoot certain things and how you guys need to operate as a team to work around them whilst they're working. Hopefully that was helpful for some of you out there. If you've got any more questions, always feel free to message me or DM me or whatever. I'll answer. I always answer, and I'm always happy to share anything that I discover along my journey with you guys.